Okay, let's move on to Trump and his legal problems. This probably is the more important conversation for the overall election. There's a couple of different instances that have happened. There was recently, there have been a lot of hearings with respect to Trump and in much of his challenges, specifically to the January 6th prosecution that is being mounted against him by Jack Smith, that all centers around presidential immunity and the theory of how and when a president can be charged, even a former president, and be held liable legally for whether that person was currently occupying the executive office of the president. So one of the judges who is hearing this presidential immunity argument leveled a very interesting hypothetical that got an even more interesting answer. Here's what they had to say.
Could a president order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival? That's an official act in order to SEAL Team 6?
He would have to be and would speedily be, impeached and convicted before the criminal prosecution.
What if he weren't? There would be no criminal prosecution, no criminal liability for that?
Chief Justice's opinion in Marbury against Madison and our constitutional tradition and the plain language of the impeachment judgment clause all clearly presuppose that what the founders were concerned about was not.
I asked you a yes or no question. Could a president who ordered SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival who was not impeached, would he be subject to criminal prosecution?
If he were impeached and convicted first. And
so your answer is no.
My answer is qualified yes.
Answer is a qualified yes. Interesting. I actually thought about it, and it doesn't seem as nuts as it sounds, because if we think back to the only similar analogous case, Barack Obama, do you remember whenever he assassinated Anwar al-Awlaki?
Yes.
So this was 2011. I mean, this is actually a crazy legal precedent.
Yeah.
Barack Obama, the president of the United States, executive office, held a due process style hearing inside the executive branch and assassinated an American citizen on foreign soil using the United States military. Now, obviously, it's substantively different in that we're talking about a political rival here, but technically, because all citizens are the same under the Constitution, it's one of those where we somewhat kind of had a test of this and nothing happened to him. Now, I do not believe that that was the right thing to do. I don't think it was right that that was even allowed to happen and that there was some sort of crazy, but the problem is that because that did happen, what I have seen is that could be cited as an instance from which this has been held.
That I know of. Did anyone try to bring charges and it's dismissed on the grounds of presidential immunity?
So his family brought charges or tried to bring them in a U.S. court. They were dismissed. It wasn't necessarily on the grounds of immunity. I believe it was under I'd have to go back and read. It has been a while. But it was around counterterrorism grounds. But I mean, if you do think about it substantively, that was an insane situation.
Yeah, but that, of course, it's an insane situation. But that couldn't be cited as precedent since there wasn't a ruling that this was barred because of presidential immunity. But your point is taken. That's interesting. And that's one I hadn't thought of. But I mean, what he's arguing for here is really wild.
Yeah, I agree.
Because if you think about it, just to lay on a separate scenario, under his legal theory here, Joe Biden could have Trump assassinated, resign before there are impeachment hearings. Good to go. Can't prosecute me. It's presidential immunity. This was an official act. I wasn't impeached. Sorry, you can't get me. So, I mean, it really is like an insane thing to argue that there is literally, as long as they're not impeached, they can do absolutely whatever they want. And I believe it was perhaps our friend Bradley Moss on Twitter who was pointing out, like, there also may be a lot of politicians who are pretty reluctant to impeach in the Senate when they know this person is so crazy that they will just have you assassinated, willy-nilly. So it is a wild thing to argue.
This all traces back to the imperial presidency theory under Richard Nixon, and then really popularized by Dick Cheney and the White House,
Bill Barr,
the Bush administration, Bill Barr,
in this,
a lot of these people who, this is a very, very actually recent interpretation of the US presidency, but it combined at a time, unfortunately, when the executive office became more powerful than ever before. This is the most logical conclusion of that. I absolutely would hope that a court would strike something like this down, because this is as king-like as it gets.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is literally how they treated monarchs in so-called monarchical constitutional systems. They're like, the Constitution applies to everybody except for the king.
Except the king.
Yeah.
It seems like these judges were very skeptical of the Trump lawyer case that was being made here. This was in the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. This applies to the some of the federal crimes that Trump has been charged with. with. But even though it appears they're going to side against Trump on, this pretty wide-reaching claim he's making for immunity here, that doesn't mean that this was necessarily a loss for Trump, in that his whole goal is to delay. The longer that he files these appeals and challenges, and they have to be heard, and it takes a while to decide, the clock is ticking. And really his hope at this point is that he gets elected president and he's able to pardon himself and get out of all of this legal jeopardy. So even though, again, I think it seems like the court is going to side against him on this specific claim, there's still, an important effect here in favor of Trump, which is just to delay the proceedings.
Absolutely. So let's combine those, because there's a lot of other developments. So that one was probably, I would say, net bad for Trump. Well, this one is definitely a net good for Trump. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. Some absolutely wild allegations that are coming out showing Fanni Willis, who's the district attorney in Fulton County, Georgia. Well, her name is now being brought up in divorce proceedings by a guy named Nathan Wade, who Fanni Willis had been tapped as the prosecutor against Trump in the grand jury investigation in the subsequent case. Well, it seems now, quote, as they put it here, the relationship between Mrs. Willis and Mr. Wade has now taken center stage in the case against Trump, because on Monday, a lawyer for one of the co-defendants charged in a court filing that Miss Willis and Mr. Wade have been romantic partners who are now, quote, profiting significantly from the prosecution at the expense of the taxpayer. So in divorce proceedings, effectively against Mr. Wade, the allegation is made that Mr. Wade and Miss Willis were in a romantic relationship, and that Mr. Wade, while being unqualified as the prosecutor, has now billed the special prosecutor office for a total of $653,881. Now, currently, none of this has been confirmed, Krystal, but much of it traces back to the ongoing divorce proceedings. I think we could probably trace it back to his wife, Mrs. Jocelyn Wade, who is trying to burn everything. But honestly, good for her. Yeah, certainly. I hope she gets the bag. But the issue that comes through this is that it would obviously taint the investigation for the Georgia Fulton County case. And in a lot of cases, I actually thought this is the single strongest one against Trump because it's about state law.
Yeah.
State law is the most ironclad place where we know election law is completely, the jurisdiction and all of that applies here. We had Trump on the phone. We had the grand jury investigation that was against him. They have total authority. There's no actual major constitutional questions about whether Georgia state court, and that's part of the reason too, Krystal, why so many of the people that they were charged as co-conspirators have all flipped against him, including Sidney Powell and others, because they don't have the same level of constitutional defense. But I mean, this is the thing about Trump. I don't know what he has been blessed by or whatever. How is it that his opponents always seem to hand him something? Because this would be genuine grounds for at least trying for dismissal and others, if you can argue a personal charge by the person who's investigating you. It's just crazy to me.
It is wild.
Yeah.
If this is true, there are allegations at this point, but she has been brought up in these divorce filings. That part I think has been confirmed. But if it is true, just the level of sloppiness.
What are you doing here?
It's wild.
Yeah.
This person who was allegedly in the relationship with Fanni Willis and who was appointed by her as the prosecutor, apparently is just some basically like kind of random suburban lawyer with no real relevant. Like in the Georgia legal community, when he got picked, there was a lot of head scratching of like, really? This guy? He doesn't really have the relevant experience. Okay, whatever, I guess. And she was made to defend his choice a number of times. She said this is someone she trusts, that he is experienced, that she knows that she can go at him and he'll come right back at her. She had to defend it a number of times. So that's part of why it looks a little bit fishier. I will say the legal analysts that they quoted in the New York Times, for whatever it's worth, seem to think that it probably wouldn't be grounds to completely dismiss the case.
Yes.
But for Trump, as we were just saying, so much of this is not about the legal arguments. It's about the politics. And this is a very potent political argument to make. That, if it's true that this is her lover, that she picked him And she's been, funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars to him as part of this prosecution. There's also allegations they were going on vacations together, using some of the money that came from this, that he's benefiting from the prosecution. Again, this is allegations, but you can see how this will be very politically salient for Trump. And I just cannot imagine, if you're Fanni Willis and you know the level of scrutiny you're going to get, you know what's coming at you, that you would be this sloppy. So we'll see how this one plays out.
We'll certainly see. But that is the best news for Trump that I've seen in a long time. Let's go to the next one, please. This just gets to a little bit we can't forget because there's so many freaking legal proceedings around Trump. So don't forget that he's also currently involved in a civil fraud trial. He was supposed to be able to give his own closing argument where he was basically going to say that this entire thing is a crazy witch hunt. But the judge has now ruled that he is not going to be allowed to give a closing argument, and instead that his attorneys will be required to do so. He said, quote, mean and nasty of the decision so far. The issue here is that if this trial finds him guilty, he will be liable for, quote, hundreds of millions of dollars in penalties. It strips him of his business license in the state of New York. Currently, he is fighting the allegation that he inflated his net worth about, you've done a lot of work on this. People can go and read in the past around whether he's guilty or not. Honestly, at this point, given the situation and all of that, and also some of the prejudgments that were made before they even went to trial, it's almost certain that he's going to be convicted. So on a personal level, this actually is a huge threat to his overall quality of life.
So they've already found that he inflated the net worth. The question now is, what is the penalty?
Exactly.
And again, this is a civil case.
Yeah.
So he's not going to end up in prison. It's just a matter of how much is he going to have to pay? What is the impact to his businesses? And basically the rub here and why they didn't end up letting Trump give his own closing statement is because the judge was like, you have to just stick to the merits of the case. You can't just go out and give some campaign speech.
Yes.
And Trump was like, no, basically, I want to give the campaign speech. And they were like, you can't do that. So that is why that fell apart. But, it's a reminder that all of these things are unpredictable, chaotic. The timelines are incredibly unsettled. The revelations that continue to emerge are, interesting and potentially relevant in a political situation. And it also underscores Trump is he is in the fight of his life. If he does not end up in the White House, it is very likely he's going to prison. You said you thought the Georgia case was the strongest.
Yeah.
I do think the Georgia case is strong. I think the documents case is probably stronger. Even though
right. I honestly hadn't
forgot about.
You're right.
I mean,
absolutely.
in terms of the cases centering around January 6th and stolen electors and whatever, I think the Georgia case is the strongest. I think overall the documents case is strongest. And yes, they have some constitutional questions that they're going to, assert, but it seems pretty open and shut. That one, just in terms of the facts, in terms of the cover-up, in terms of the level of classification of the documents, et cetera. So if he's not in the White House, again, very likely he is headed to prison. So he's going to do whatever it takes to try to avoid getting nailed on these charges, to try to make sure that he does end up back in the White House, and the stakes for him personally could not possibly be higher.
Absolutely. Well said.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.